May 1938. Europe's on the edge of war, Japan's tearing through China, and the US Navy has a problem keeping admirals awake at night. Every carrier fighter they've got is obsolete. The Grumman F-3F biplane tops out at 260 miles per hour. Respectable for 1935, utterly suicidal for what's coming. Intelligence reports from Spain's civil war are clear. The new generation of fighters from Germany and Britain are hitting 350, maybe 370 miles per hour. If shooting starts in the Pacific, American pilots will be flying coffins. The Bureau of Aeronautics issues a specification in February 1938 that reads like a wish list written by someone who doesn't understand physics. They want a single-seat fighter that can hit 400 miles per hour, carry 4 guns, armor plate, self-sealing fuel tanks, and still land on a carrier deck at 70 miles per hour without killing the pilot. Oh, and they want a flying prototype in 14 months. Not a production model working prototype that proves the concept won't disintegrate at high speed. Vought Aircraft in Stratford, Connecticut gets the contract in June 1938, and Chief Engineer Rex Beisel reads the specs with the kind of dread you feel when your boss asks you to build a cathedral in a year. Vaught's entire engineering department is 28 people. Not 28 aerodynamicists, 28 total staff, including the guys who sharpen pencils. They've never built anything remotely this fast. Their last fighter, the SB-2U Vindicator, is a dive bomber that cruises at 215 miles per hour and handles like a refrigerator with wings. Beisel calls a meeting in a second-floor conference room that smells like cigarette smoke and desperation. He's 41 years old, MIT trained, and he's built biplanes his entire career. Now the Navy wants him to create something that doesn't exist anywhere in the American aviation industry. 400-mile-per-hour fighter, small enough to fit on an elevator that drops planes into a carrier hangar. The British Supermarine Spitfire is the only thing in the world even close to this performance, and nobody in Connecticut has seen one, except in grainy newsreels. The team starts with the only advantage they've got. Pratt & Whitney, just 90 miles away in Hartford, has a new engine in testing called the R2800 double Wasp. It's an 18-cylinder radial that produces 2,000 horsepower, nearly double what any Navy fighter has ever carried. That power could theoretically push an airframe past 400 miles per hour. But there's a catch that'll haunt this project for 2 years. An engine that powerful needs a massive propeller to convert horsepower into thrust. The math says they need a propeller at least 13 feet in diameter. 13 feet. The tallest landing gear on any carrier fighter in 1938 is barely 8 feet off the ground. Mount a 13-foot propeller on a normal fighter, and the tips will carve furrows in the carrier deck every time the tail lifts during takeoff. You can't just make the landing gear taller, long spindly legs collapse on hard landings, and carrier landings are always hard. Beisel's team has 14 months to solve a problem that looks mathematically impossible, and the clock started ticking the day they signed the contract. The R2800 double Wasp sits on a test stand in Hartford, and it's the most beautiful nightmare Vought engineers have ever seen. Pratt & Whitney's designers have crammed 18 cylinders into 2 rows, creating a radial engine 52 inches in diameter that weighs 2,300 pounds and generates 2,000 horsepower. At takeoff, for comparison, the engine in the F-3F biplane the Navy's currently flying makes 950 horsepower. This thing has more than twice the power, and it's reliable. Pratt & Whitney's been testing it since 1937, and it's not grenading itself every 50 hours like experimental engines usually do. But that propeller problem isn't going away. The engineers run the calculations over and over, hoping the math will somehow change. It doesn't. To absorb 2,000 horsepower efficiently, you need blade area, and blade area means diameter. A 13-foot 4-inch propeller is the minimum. Anything smaller, and you're wasting power, generating noise instead of thrust, and probably shaking the airframe apart with vibration. Hamilton Standard, the propeller manufacturer, confirms it 13 feet 4 inches. Or you're leaving 300 horsepower on the table. Rex Beisel stares at sketches of conventional fighter layouts and sees the same problem from every angle. A normal inline engine like the ones Messerschmitt and Supermarine use sits low in the fuselage. The propeller shaft is maybe 3 feet off the ground. You can mount a big propeller because the engine itself provides ground clearance. But radial engines are fat. The R2800's 52-inch diameter means the propeller shaft sits right in the center of that circle, about 26 inches off the ground if you use conventional landing gear. Add a 13-foot propeller, and the bottom blade tips will hit the deck with 6.5 feet to spare, which is to say, they'll hit 6.5 feet into the deck. The obvious solution is stilts. Make the landing gear 10 feet tall. But landing gear that tall has to be immensely strong to handle carrier landings where planes drop onto the deck at 17 feet per second, about the impact of jumping off a one-story building. Strength means weight, and weight is the enemy of every aircraft designer. The Navy spec says the whole aeroplane can't weigh more than 7,500 pounds empty. If you're burning 800 pounds on landing gear, that's 800 pounds you can't spend on guns, ammunition, armor, or fuel. And tall landing gear is structurally inefficient. Long struts bend and break. The Navy's already had fatal accidents with fighters that landed hard and had their gear punch up through the wings. Some of Beisel's team suggests a different engine. Maybe they could use 2 smaller engines, or go with an inline Allison V1710 like the P40 uses. Beisel shuts that down immediately. The V1710 makes 1,500 horsepower, not enough to hit 400 miles per hour with the weight they're carrying. And twin-engine fighters are heavy, complex, and have twice the maintenance headaches. The Navy wants single-engine simplicity, and besides, if one engine quits 200 miles from the carrier, you're swimming. The R282-800 is the only engine in America that gives them a chance at the performance the Navy demanded. So they're stuck. They've got an engine that can deliver the speed and a propeller that can harness the power, but no way to keep that propeller from becoming a very expensive lawnmower. Beisel spends 3 weeks in July 1938 sketching configurations that all fail for different reasons. Raised cockpits that ruin the pilot's view. Mid-wing designs that put the landing gear in the wrong place. Contraptions with folding propeller blades that would never survive combat damage. The calendar pages keep flipping, and they still don't have an airplane, just an engine, a propeller, and a geometry problem that's killing the whole project. August 1938. Rex Beisel's sitting at his drafting table at 2 in the morning, and he draws a line that bends. Not a smooth curve, a hard angle, like a seagull's wing mid-flight. He sketches it fast before the idea evaporates. The wing roots attach to the fuselage normally, then after about 3 feet they crank downward at a sharp angle, then level out again for the rest of the span. An inverted gull-wing. The lowest point of the wing is out near the landing gear attachment, which means the gear itself can be short and stout, but the propeller at the center still gets the clearance it needs. It's not a new idea. Polish designer Zygmunt Pupławski used gull wings on fighters in the early 1930s, and the German Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber has a similar configuration. But nobody's ever tried it on a high-speed fighter that needs to slam onto a carrier deck. Beisel does the geometry with a slide rule and realizes the numbers actually work. The gear legs only need to be about 7 feet long, which is manageable, and they can be built beefy enough to survive carrier landings without adding absurd weight. The angle puts the gear attachment point at the wing's strongest structural location, right where the internal spar is thickest. And there's a bonus nobody expected: the sharp angle where the wing bends creates a natural fairing for the landing gear. Instead of hanging the wheels in the wind like most fighters, they can tuck them partially into the wing bend, reducing drag. He shows the sketch to the engineering team the next morning, and the reaction is mixed. The optimists see an elegant solution, the pessimists see a structural nightmare. Every angle in a wing is a stress concentration where cracks start, and those bends will need internal reinforcement that adds weight. Chief Structural Engineer Paul Baker runs preliminary load calculations and comes back with cautious approval. The bends will need heavy spars, but it's doable, and the weight penalty is maybe 150 pounds over a straight wing, painful, but not fatal. The real concern is aerodynamics. Nobody knows how air will behave flowing over those sharp angles at 400 miles per hour. The inverted gull creates a junction where the downward angled section meets the straight outer panel, and junctions can create turbulence, which creates drag, which kills speed. Vought doesn't have a wind tunnel sophisticated enough to test this. They've got a small tunnel that's fine for biplanes, but it can't simulate airflow at 400 miles per hour. The only way to know if it'll work is to build it and fly it. Beisel makes the call in late August 1938. They're going with the inverted gull-wing. It's a gamble, but every other option leads to a dead end. The Navy wants a prototype by September 1939. That's 13 months away now, and they haven't bent a single piece of aluminum. There's no time for safe choices. The design starts taking shape through fall 1938. The fuselage is a semi-monocoque aluminum structure, a stressed skin design where the outer shell carries structural loads instead of relying entirely on an internal frame. It's lighter than older truss frame designs, but harder to manufacture because every metal panel has to be precisely formed. The cockpit sits far back, almost over the wing's trailing edge, giving the fuselage a long snout that houses the massive R2800 engine, oil coolers, ammunition boxes, and 650 caliber machine guns. The Navy upgraded the armament requirement to 6 guns after seeing combat reports from China. That long nose is going to create visibility problems, but there's no way around it. Everything has to go somewhere, and the laws of physics say heavy things go in front to balance the aeroplane. The wing itself becomes a masterpiece of compromise. The inner bent sections are built with massive aluminum spars capable of handling 9G maneuvers, 9 times the force of gravity, which is what happens when a pilot yanks the stick hard in a high-speed turn. The outer panels are thinner, more conventional, and house fuel tanks that hold 237 gallons. The whole wing is designed to fold upward for carrier storage, hinged just outboard of the gull bend, reducing the aircraft's width from 41 feet to just 17 feet when parked. December 1938, and Vaught's factory floor in Stratford looks like controlled chaos. The Navy's deadline is 9 months away, and there's still no airplane, just blueprints, wooden mock-ups, and a growing pile of aluminum sheets waiting to be transformed into the fastest fighter in America. The engineering team has swelled to 42 people working 6-day weeks that regularly stretch to 16-hour days. Rex Beisel institutes a rule: if you're stuck on a problem for more than 2 hours, you bring it to the group immediately. There's no time for lone wolf engineering heroics. The fuselage comes together first. Craftsmen hand-form aluminum panels over wooden bucks, hammering and filing until the curves match the templates within a 1/16 of an inch. Every panel overlaps the next, rivet holes drilled precisely so the skin stays smooth. Bumps and gaps mean drag, and drag means they miss 400 miles per hour. The engine mount is a brutalist sculpture of welded steel tubes designed to hold 2,300 pounds of engine and absorb the shock when a carrier landing slams the nose down at 3 times normal gravity. Its ugly, overbuilt, and absolutely critical engine mounts fail, people die. By February 1939, they're mounting the actual R2800 for the first time, and immediately they discover their first major crisis: cooling. Radial engines are air-cooled. They rely on airflow across the cylinder heads to shed heat. At 2,000 horsepower, the R2800 generates enough waste heat to melt itself in about 4 minutes if the cooling isn't perfect. The cowling, the metal shroud around the engine, has to channel air across every cylinder evenly while creating minimal drag. Vaught's first cowling design looks aerodynamically clean, but cooks the rear cylinders to 550 degrees Fahrenheit. After 2 ground tests, the engine starts misfiring and belching blue smoke. The team strips the cowling off and starts over. They add gill-like louvers that can open and close, adjustable cooling flaps around the bottom, and a complex system of internal baffles that force air into the tight spaces between cylinders. It's a nightmare to manufacture. Each baffle is hand-cut from aluminum sheet and fitted individually, but by April 1939, they've got an engine that runs at full power for 30 minutes without melting. Good enough for now. They'll refine it later, if there is a later. The inverted gull wings arrive from the structural assembly shop in March 1939, and they're gorgeous and terrifying in equal measure. Each wing weighs 580 pounds and spans 20 feet from root to tip. The bend is exactly 15 degrees down, then back to horizontal, and the spar running through that junction is a massive I-beam of aluminum 3 inches deep. When they hang the wings on test fixtures and load them with sandbags simulating 9G forces, the structure flexes about 2 inches at the wingtips and springs back perfectly. No cracks, no permanent deformation. Paul Baker, the structures guy, signs off with visible relief. Mounting the landing gear proves harder than anyone expected. Each main gear leg is a complex assembly of steel forgings, aluminum fairings and hydraulic actuators that have to retract the wheel backward and upward into the wing bend, while simultaneously rotating it 90 degrees, so it lies flat. The mechanism is designed by a 26-year-old engineer named Frank Corbett, and it's so clever it'll be copied by other manufacturers for decades. But clever doesn't mean reliable. During ground tests in April 1939, the right gear refuses to retract, and they discover a hydraulic line is kinked. They reroute the line, test again, and the gear actuator cracks a mounting bracket. They reinforce the bracket with a gusset plate. Test again, and this time it works. Small victories. May 1939, the prototype is 80% complete, but the Navy's deadline is 4 months away, and they're discovering that the last 20% takes as long as the first 80. Control cables have to be rigged and tensioned. The electrical system, generator, battery, lights, radios, instruments has to be installed and debugged. The fuel system needs plumbing from wing tanks to the engine with pumps and valves that won't vapor lock at high altitude. Every system interacts with every other system, and problems multiply. A radio wire runs too close to a fuel line. The rudder cables interfere with the elevator mechanism. The gun sight blocks the pilot's view of an essential instrument. Test pilot Lyman Bullard sits in the incomplete cockpit in July 1939 and tells Beisel the visibility is criminally bad. The long nose blocks everything forward and down. The pilot can't see the carrier deck during final approach. Beisel knows this is a problem, but doesn't know how to fix it without redesigning the entire fuselage. They make a note, hope it's manageable, and keep building. May 29, 1940, the F4U-1 prototype sits on the ramp at Stratford, 9 months late, but finally ready. It's been 24 months since Vought signed the contract, and the aircraft gleaming in the morning sun looks like nothing else in the sky. The inverted gull wings give it a predatory stance, like a hawk folding its wings mid-stoop. The paint is glossy blue-grey, regulation navy colours, and the massive 3-bladed propeller looks absurdly large because it is. 13 feet 4 inches of Hamilton standard constant-speed propeller, the tips reaching almost to the pilot's eye level when the tail is on the ground. Lyman Bullard does his walk-around inspection with the careful paranoia of a test pilot who knows the first flight is when all the things you didn't think of try to kill you. He's 34, a former Navy pilot who's been flying experimental aircraft for Vought since 1936, and he survived 2 crashes that would have killed less skilled aviators. He checks control surface movement, ailerons, elevators, rudder, making sure nothing binds or moves the wrong direction. He tugs on inspection panels, looking for loose fasteners. He peers into the engine cowling with a flashlight, checking for tools or rags that mechanics sometimes leave inside. The R2800 has 73 hours of ground testing, but ground testing and flight are different universes. At 10:15 a.m., Bullard straps in. The cockpit is cramped, surrounded by that long nose that blocks his forward view completely when the tail is down. He can't see the runway ahead. He has to S-turn the aircraft during taxi, swinging the nose left and right to look around it. The engine start is a mechanical symphony. Fuel boost pumps on, mixture rich, propeller full forward, magnetos both, then the starter. The R2800 coughs, backfires once, then catches with a bellow that rattles windows in the administration building. 200 yards away, 18 cylinders firing, 2,000 horsepower, straining against the brakes. Bullard taxis to runway 24, does his run-up checks, magnetos, propeller pitch, oil pressure, cylinder head temperatures, and everything reads normal. He lines up, pushes the throttle forward smoothly, and the Corsair accelerates like it's been kicked. The long nose drops as the tail comes up, and suddenly Bullard can see the runway. 50 miles per hour, 60, 70. The stick goes light in his hands, and at 82 miles per hour, the F4U breaks ground and climbs. The wings flex slightly as the weight comes off the wheels. Engine instruments all green. He's flying. The plan is simple. Stay over the airfield, climb to 10,000 feet, do basic handling checks, and land. No heroics, no speed runs. Just prove the thing flies and doesn't immediately try to kill you. Bullard climbs at 2,500 feet per minute, twice what the old F3F could manage. And at 10,000 feet he levels off and starts exploring. Gentle turns left and right. The controls are responsive but heavy, especially the ailerons. Roll rate is good, not great. Stability is solid. When he trims it out and takes his hands off the stick, it flies straight. No nasty surprises yet. Then he pushes the throttle forward to military power, 1,850 horsepower, and the Corsair jumps. The airspeed needle swings past 300, then 320, then 340 miles per hour, faster than any production American fighter has ever gone. Bullard can feel the airframe shaking slightly, not violently, just the buzz of air molecules screaming past at 500 feet per second. He levels out and checks the indicated airspeed 352 miles per hour at 10,000 feet. Converting for altitude and temperature, that's close to 380 miles per hour true airspeed. Not quite 400, but they're in the ballpark. After 35 minutes, Bullard brings it back to Stratford and greases the landing. One bounce, then the mains stick. He's grinning when he climbs out, and Rex Beisel, who's been chain-smoking on the ramp, shakes his hand hard enough to hurt. The airplane flies. It's not done, there are 100 things to fix. But it flies, and it's fast. Over the next 3 months through summer 1940, Vought and Navy test pilots push the F4U harder. They find the top speed at altitude 405 miles per hour, at 19,900 feet on October 1, 1940, making it the first US fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour in level flight. They test dive performance and watch the airspeed indicator hit 550 miles per hour before Bullard pulls out, reporting mild buffeting but no structural problems. They test carrier approach speeds and discover the visibility problem is worse than anyone thought. Bullard says landing this thing on a carrier deck will be like landing from the back seat of a car where someone's welded sheet metal over the windshield. But the speed is real, the range is good. 1,000 miles with internal fuel, and the Navy's suddenly very interested. They order 584 production aircraft in June 1940, before the prototype testing is even finished. October 1941. Production F4U Corsairs are rolling off Vaught's assembly line in Stratford, and the Navy's preparing carrier squadrons to transition to the new fighter. The aircraft has changed substantially from the prototype. Production models have a 17-inch taller canopy for better visibility, moved 6 inches aft to help balance. They've added armor plate behind the pilot seat, self-sealing fuel tanks that don't explode when bullets puncture them, and the .650 caliber Browning machine guns the Navy demanded, 3 per wing with 400 rounds per gun. Empty weight has crept up to 8,282 pounds, 500 pounds heavier than the original specification. But the engine's been upgraded to 2250 horsepower, so performance is still respectable. Top speed is 417 miles per hour at 19,900 feet. Climb rate is 2,900 feet per minute. On paper, it's the best carrier fighter in the world. Then the Navy tries to actually land it on a carrier, and everything goes sideways. The first shipboard trials happen on USS Sangamon in September 1942, and the results are disastrous. Despite the raised canopy, forward visibility during the approach is still terrible. The pilot can't see the landing signal officer until the final seconds, and he definitely can't see the deck. Pilots are coming in too high, too low, too fast, and the LSO is frantically waving them off more often than clearing them to land. When they do land, another problem emerges. The main landing gear has a tendency to bounce on touchdown. If the pilot doesn't nail the landing perfectly, the Corsair porpoises bounces once, the nose slams down, bounces again, and sometimes the gear strut collapses or the propeller tips strike the deck. Lieutenant Commander Sam Porter, one of the Navy's most experienced carrier pilots, writes a scathing evaluation in November 1942. He lists 17 separate issues that make the Corsair unsuitable for carrier operations. The visibility problem is number 1. The landing gear bounce is number 2. Number 3 is oil leaking from the engine during hard turns, coating the windscreen and blinding the pilot. Number 4 is the tendency for the left wing to stall before the right wing during slow-speed approaches, causing an abrupt roll that can flip the aircraft inverted if you're 50 feet off the deck. Numbers 5 through 17 are smaller, but cumulatively damning. The cockpit layout is confusing, the fuel gauges are inaccurate, the hydraulic system occasionally fails to lower the tailhook, and the canopy latch sometimes opens during violent maneuvers, sending the canopy into the tail and scaring pilots into thinking they've had a structural failure. The Navy pulls the Corsair from carrier qualification in December 1942 and tells Vought to fix it. Rex Beisel's team, already stretched thin managing production, has to troubleshoot a laundry list of problems while the aircraft are being delivered to squadrons that can't use them on carriers. They try everything. They lengthen the tail wheel strut by 6 inches, raising the tail and improving the approach angle. This helps visibility marginally. They add a small spoiler to the right wing leading edge to make both wings stall simultaneously instead of asymmetrically. They redesign the oil breather system to stop oil from coating the windscreen. They stiffen the landing gear struts to reduce bounce. Every fix takes weeks to design, test, and implement on the production line, and by March 1943, they've burned through 15 design modifications. The improved F4U model addresses most of the handling issues, but the visibility problem is intrinsic to the design. That long nose isn't going anywhere. It houses the engine, guns, and ammunition, and you can't just cut 8 feet off without redesigning the entire airplane. The Navy runs more carrier trials in April 1943 with the improved model, and while it's better, it's still marginal. Keyless report they feel like they're guessing where the deck is during final approach, relying on the LSO's signals and instinct rather than actually seeing what they're doing. In a combat environment with battle damage, low fuel, and wounded pilots trying to get aboard at night, this is a recipe for mass casualties. The breaking point comes in May 1943. The Navy's preparing for the massive Central Pacific offensive, the island-hopping campaign that'll take them from the Gilberts to the Marianas to Okinawa, and they need reliable carrier fighters immediately. They've got Grumman F-6F Hellcats in production now, a newer design with excellent visibility and docile landing characteristics. The Hellcat is 25 miles per hour slower than the Corsair, but it's vastly easier to operate from a carrier deck. In June 1943, the Navy makes the call. The F-6F Hellcat becomes the primary carrier fighter. The F4U Corsair is reassigned to land-based squadrons operated by the U.S. Marine Corps. After 5 years of development and 2 years of production, Vaught's record-breaking fighter is banned from the mission it was designed for. February 1943, Guadalcanal, Marine Fighter Squadron VMF-12M4, call sign checkerboards, receives the first combat-ready Corsairs in the Pacific theatre. The planes arrive with their carrier rejections still fresh. The Navy doesn't want them on ships, so the Marines get them for land bases scattered across the Solomon Islands. The squadron commander, Major William Gaze, walks around the bent-wing fighters with mixed feelings. They're beautiful, intimidatingly fast, and according to the manual, they'll outrun and outclimb anything the Japanese have. But his pilots have been flying F4F Wildcats, a stubby little fighter that's slow but forgiving, and the Corsair has a reputation for killing inexperienced pilots during landing. Half his squadron qualifies as inexperienced. The first combat mission launches on February 14, 1943. 12 Corsairs escorting a formation of SBD, dauntless dive bombers attacking Japanese positions on Bougainville. The Corsairs cruise at 24,000 feet, and the pilots are stunned by how much airplane they're flying. The cockpit is spacious compared to the Wildcat. Visibility is excellent once you're airborne. Those gull wings sit low, giving an unobstructed view above and to the sides. The R2800 engine purrs at cruise power, and they're covering ground at 280 miles per hour, 50 miles per hour faster than the Wildcats ever managed. Then the radio crackles. Bogies inbound, high and fast. 6 Japanese A6M0 fighters diving on the dive bombers. What happens next becomes the template for 3 years of Corsair combat tactics. The Zeros are at 26,000 feet, the Corsairs at 24,000. In a Wildcat, you'd be stuck below them trying to climb while they dictate the engagement. But the Corsair climbs at 2,900 feet per minute, and within 90 seconds the Marines are level with the Zeros and accelerating. The lead Corsair pilot, First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh, shoves the throttle to the firewall full military power, 2,250 horsepower, and the fighter leaps forward. The airspeed indicator swings past 350 miles per hour, then 380, then 400. The Zeros, maxing out at 330 miles per hour, can't match it. Walsh closes to 300 yards, lines up the gun sight pipper on a Zero's cockpit and squeezes the trigger. 650 caliber Brownings erupt, firing 4,800 rounds per minute combined. The Zero disintegrates, literally comes apart in mid-air, wings folding up, fuselage tumbling. Walsh pulls up, looks for another target, but the remaining Zeros are already diving away, trying to escape. The Corsairs chase them down to 8,000 feet before breaking off. 1 mission, 1 kill, 0 losses. By April 1943, Marine Corsair squadrons are operating from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, Munda on New Georgia, and rough coral strips on Vella La Vella and Bougainville. The Japanese call them whistling death. The sound of air screaming through the oil coolers creates a distinctive high-pitched howl that's audible from miles away. The Marines develop tactics that leverage everything the Corsair does well. They never dogfight. Turning with a Zero is suicide, because the Japanese fighter can reverse direction in half the radius. Instead, they fight vertically, dive from altitude, make one high-speed pass, climb back up using the Corsair's superior power, repeat. The Zeros can't follow into the vertical. They don't have the engine power. If a Zero gets on your tail, you don't turn. You accelerate and extend. The Corsair can outrun anything Japan has in level flight or a dive. First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh becomes the first Corsair ace on May 13, 1943, with his 5th confirmed kill, a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber that he intercepts at 18,000 feet and shreds with a 3-second burst. By August 1943, Walsh has 15 kills and a Congressional Medal of Honor recommendation working its way up the chain. The squadron's scoreboard at Henderson Field tracks the kill ratio 11.3 to 1. For every Corsair lost in combat, Marine pilots are downing 11 Japanese aircraft. It's the most lopsided air superiority ratio in the Pacific War. The Corsair's 650 caliber guns prove devastating against everything from fighters to bombers. Each gun fires armor-piercing incendiary rounds that can punch through the Zero's lightweight structure from 500 yards. The Japanese fighters have minimal armor and non-self-sealing fuel tanks. A 2-second burst from a Corsair usually results in a fire or catastrophic structural failure. Against bombers, the firepower is even more decisive. A Betty bomber can absorb dozens of 7.7mm rounds from a Zero and keep flying, but 50 caliber rounds deliver 4,800 rounds per minute of devastating energy that tears off wings and ignites fuel tanks. By December 1943, 10 Marine squadrons are flying Corsairs in the Solomons, and the Japanese air groups in the region are effectively destroyed. The Marines have air superiority so complete that bomber missions fly without fighter escort because there's nothing left to intercept them. The Navy's carrier rejection has accidentally created a legend. The Corsair story doesn't end with the Marines in the Solomons. It becomes a case study that engineering schools still teach today. Vought delivered a working prototype in 24 months with a skeleton crew, solving problems that didn't have textbook answers because the textbooks hadn't been written yet. That inverted gull-wing that Rex Beisel sketched at 2 in the morning became one of the most recognizable aircraft silhouettes in history. And the engineering logic behind it, solving ground clearance without excessive weight, gets taught in every aerospace structures course. The British Fleet Air Arm eventually figured out how to operate Corsairs from carriers by developing a curved approach pattern that let pilots see the deck throughout the landing, and they used that technique to deploy Corsairs aboard HMS Illustrious and HMS Victorious through 1944 and 1945. Production numbers tell the scale of what Vought created. From 1942 to 1953, manufacturers built 12,571 Corsairs across multiple variants. Vought produced 7,829 at the Stratford plant. Goodyear built 4,014 under license as the FG1. Brewster added 735 as the F4U before quality control problems shut down their contract. The production run lasted 11 years, spanning World War II and the Korean War, making the Corsair one of the longest-serving piston engine fighters in history. It flew combat missions in 1950 over Korea with the same basic airframe designed in 1938, which is roughly equivalent to flying a 1980s F-16 in combat today. The engineering innovations extended beyond the airframe. The R2800 engine became the most produced high-power aircraft engine in history, over 125,000 units built. It powered everything from the P-47 Thunderbolt to the Douglas A-26 Invader to post-war airliners like the Martin 404. Pratt and Whitney's engineers refined it continuously, eventually extracting 2,800 horsepower from the same basic architecture. That's a 40% power increase over the original 1938 design, without increasing displacement or fundamentally changing the engine. It's a masterclass in iterative refinement. Make the pistons lighter, improve the supercharger, optimize the fuel injection, tune the ignition timing, and suddenly you've got 800 extra horsepower. The 14-month deadline that seemed impossible in 1938 became the blueprint for wartime aircraft development. When the US entered World War II in December 1941, the aviation industry had to design, test, and mass-produce fighters, bombers, and transports on schedules that peacetime engineers would have called insane. The P-51 Mustang went from contract signing to first flight in 117 days. The B-29 Superfortress prototype flew 15 months after design work began. None of these programs had the luxury of 5-year development cycles. The Corsair proved you could compress the timeline if you made fast decisions, accepted calculated risks, and didn't wait for perfect information before moving forward. Rex Beisel's career peaked with the Corsair. He became Vaught's chief engineer and later vice president of engineering, but he never designed another aircraft as influential. He retired in 1960 and died in 1972 at age 75, just as the last operational Corsairs were being retired from service in Central American Air Forces. The bent-wing fighter outlived its creator by a decade in active military service. An extraordinary legacy for an aircraft designed with slide rules and drafted by hand on paper. The kill ratio tells the ultimate story. Marine and Navy Corsair pilots claimed 2,140 air-to-air victories against 189 Corsairs. Lost to enemy aircraft an 11.3-to-1 ratio that stands as one of the most dominant fighter performances in aviation history. The F-6F Hellcat, which replaced the Corsair on carriers, achieved a 19-to-1 ratio, but it flew in later stages of the war when Japanese pilot quality had severely degraded. The Corsair fought from 1943 through 1945 against experienced Japanese naval aviators, and still maintained that staggering edge. Engineers still study the Corsair when they're facing impossible deadlines with insufficient resources. The lesson isn't that you should cut corners or skip testing. Vought didn't do either. The lesson is that you identify the critical path, solve the hardest problems first, and keep moving even when you don't have all the answers. Beisel didn't know if the inverted gull-wing would work aerodynamically when he committed to it in August 1938. He knew it solved the propeller clearance problem, and he knew they didn't have time to explore safer alternatives. So he moved forward, accepted the risk, and adjusted as problems emerged. That's not recklessness. That's engineering under pressure. The result was an aircraft that fought in 2 wars, set speed records, saved pilots' lives, and proved that seemingly impossible deadlines become possible when you stop waiting for certainty and start building airplanes.